Geek. Talking baseball every week. Cause they're Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and the Geek, the busy off-season edition.
Yeah,
Here at Gleeman,
there was-
the Athletic.
Who are you?
John Bonus, Twin State.
Oh, that's who you are? Oh, I've been wanting to do this show with
That's
someone
the
else.
one, yes.
This whole offseason, first of all, I can tell your mic setup's not going to work for you, John, because you're too far away. John's trying to copy me today.
It sounds good in my ears. Yes, I've tried not to touch the mic because it absolutely makes sound when I wave around the mic or I switch hands with the mic.
The real truth is John just thinks I look cooler because I have a mic stand.
I love this you hunched over look.
Well, that's my look for everything. Mic stand or no, I'm hunched over. I'm like the hunchback of Northeast.
Here's
they call
why
me.
it's not going to work is because I'm going to have to go way over here to clear my throat.
Well, maybe that's good. There's been absolutely nothing to talk about, realistically,
Right.
from the Twins' standpoint. There's been some TV speculation, which we have a little bit more on that today, which we can get into.
TV speculation.
But in terms of actual moves, or even like rumored moves that we can kind of speculate about, it's been 3+ months of almost literally nothing, with apologies to Josh Stalmont, who's indeed something
Right, yes.
and a worthwhile human being to discuss and all that.
Yes.
And now, I'm not trying to say that the whole roster has been overhauled in the last 72 hours or something, but we have the Jorge Polanco trade to talk about.
Correct.
We have Joe Mauer. Since last we spoke on the free show, which was about 2 weeks, Joe Mauer is now a first ballot Hall of Famer.
Yeah, right.
We're going to give you just a real quick recap of the Winter Meltdown event from last weekend.
And Twins Fest, yeah.
And
Good.
Twins Fest in general, because, we talked to, Baldelli and Falvey and St. Peter and all that. And now what are we? 12 days from the start of spring training, basically.
12 days exactly, right.
And from the Polanco trade, one of the domino effects of that was that the Twins' payroll dropped by another $6.5 million, roughly $6 to $7 million.
Right.
And talking to Falvey the night of the trade, and I know people are always skeptical when it comes to the Twins spending money, and rightfully so. But
And we'll be talking about that as well.
yes, I will say that Falvey is, I guess you would say very good at saying a lot without saying anything.
Yes.
In general.
Yes.
I mean, there's a true skill set that
Sure.
people in his position have in general, but I would say he's about the 90th percentile for that. Like, as someone
He'll
who...
give you a lot of information, just not the stuff you actually want to know.
Well, it's a lot of words. Like, as someone who transcribes his audio on a regular basis, it is amazing how often we come out of his office during the season, especially. And it's like, there's 22 minutes of audio. Let's split this up 4 or 5 ways. We'll transcribe it. We all transcribe our little 5-minute chunk, and then we all look at each other and go, is there a single anything in here?
A money quote?
Right. But the night of the trade, he did a Zoom with like a handful of reporters, and I felt in Falvey speak, translating Falvey-esque or whatever you would call it, I thought he was pretty adamant that this money will be spent. The $6 or $7 million that they cleared, plus maybe a few million on top of that, but that even I'm a little skeptical about. And went a step further and essentially said, or came as close as he will ever say, to saying, we need some hitters. We need some hitting.
Yep.
And so we'll talk about what's left of free agent options. I mean, it could be trades too, but he also hinted that it would probably be free agents. And we talked, 10 days ago or something on the Patreon side about how slow moving this offseason has been in general for baseball, and the fact that, a dozen of the top 40 free agents or whatever were still unsigned, which is uncommon even within baseball, which is always incredibly slow moving compared to the other sports. And at the time, I didn't think that would really be in the Twins' favor because I thought the Twins had $0 to spend. I thought it was like irrelevant to them. Now, if you got $6 or $8 million, or let's say $10 million, if we're being really optimistic,
I'm hearing 11. So
whatever.
Right.
It doesn't seem like a lot. Although I will say there's only 5 guys on the whole Twins team making more than $6 million right now. But if there are 10 or 15 quality free agents, now the pitchers, I think they're not going to get Blake Snell or Jordan Montgomery for $11 million.
Or apparently Corbin Burns.
Or Corbin Burns, we should
probably mention
about
that
traded
trade
last
too,
night
yeah, right.
from the Brewers to the Orioles. I feel for somebody, there's probably a lot of people who listen to this show who are either living in Wisconsin or are Brewers fans also.
Sure.
And so I feel for you because all the complaints about the Twins this offseason and just in general, which is they don't push enough for contention and they don't spend enough money. And the Brewers just dropped below the Twins in terms of payroll.
Yep.
They're like 22nd now because Burns was making, I don't know.
I think their total payroll is about $102 million.
Right.
And I anticipate the Twins being about 125, 127. Right. Yeah.
And that's, well, not as weak as the AL Central. The NL Central is no great shakes.
Yeah. Right.
And they might have been co-favorites heading into the season if they just hung on to Burns. They brought in Rhys Hoskins like a week ago or whatever. Yep. And now you're trading your ace. I get it. It's similar to the thinking with the Polanco trade, but on a bigger scale, which is Burns is going to leave as a free agent. I mean, the Milwaukee Brewers are not going to sign Burns to a deal beyond this season. You know, it would be 150, 180, $200 million.
A compensatory draft pick is what they're going to get, which they got in the trade, by the way.
Essentially,
I loved that deal. I loved that aspect of that deal.
So, yeah, they could have had one season of Corbin Burns in a season that they're planning to contend, which is maximizing that value, and then gotten like a number between 30 and 40 draft pick overall next year when he walks, like the Twins are getting for Sonny Gray. They traded him to the Orioles. Now, you've now removed your ace in a season you're theoretically planning to contend.
Right.
But in return, you get three pieces, one of which is the number 34 pick in next year's draft because those are the only picks that can be traded. The supplemental picks, basically.
That's right.
And so that essentially crosses that out or cancels that out, what you would have gotten if he'd walked.
It just makes it very clean.
Right. Yeah, I like that. I agree. We're both linear thinkers in that way. I like the idea of that. Yeah. And then, so you've canceled that out. And so then what
is 1 year of Corbin Burns worth? Well, apparently it's worth 2 fringe top 100 prospects.
Yes. And I think it's not dissimilar, again, on a bigger scale from the Polanco thing, which is Polanco had a team option for next year too. But I think in the Twins' minds, and we'll get a lot more into this obviously on the show, although I will say, two of the topics we're going to talk about today, we did immediate full show reactions to on the Patreon side, and that is the Mauer Hall of Fame. We talked about the next morning, and then the Polanco trade we talked about the next morning for over an hour on each. We really got into the nitty-gritty details of both and had more of a long discussion. We'll get into some of that,
we had
obviously.
about an hour and a half on both of those topics.
Yes. So now, you might say to yourself, that seems like overkill, in which case you're listening to the right show.
Correct.
But if you say, that sounds interesting, get over at patreon.com/Gleeman. But
I should also mention there might very well be a emergency podcast coming up this weekend or in the very near future. So it's nice to...
I would predict we will have multiple emergency podcasts within the next 3 weeks, let's say.
I would say...
One way or the other.
Yep, I agree.
But just to link that back to Polanco, and then we'll move on from this one. But, the Twins, I think, feared with Polanco, and I think it's justified. I mean, nobody knows from a health standpoint, but he's 30. He's making $10.5 million this year, which is not a crazy salary, but it's not like, oh my God, he's such a bargain. Right. And then he's got a $12 million option or a $750,000 buyout for next year. And again, that's a reasonable salary if he's reasonably healthy. He's a $12 million and beyond player. But I think the Twins' fear was if he has another season like he had last year, and really the year before, which is he was good, but he basically missed half the season with leg injuries, then the notion of a $12 million option on him becomes sort of maybe neutral-ish value. At which point, can we even get anything for him in the offseason? And then it becomes similar to Burns, where Burns is just an outright free agent after the season. And so it's teams like Milwaukee and teams like Minnesota are always in position, or at least put themselves in position, where you try to balance present and future, which we talked a lot about on the Patreon side, because we kind of viewed the trade from different lenses in that regard. Right. And this is an example of that, which I don't think Milwaukee is not contending this year. I actually think they still have a decent chance. They just
signed Rhys Hoskins.
And their roster is certainly not significantly worse than the other teams at the top of the Central. And clearly the Twins are planning to contend this year.
I mean, the Brewers are doing what the Guardians do, right? They're trying to shuffle things on the fly, like especially they've been good at, similar to the Guardians, they've been good at developing starting pitching.
Right. The Rays are another example of a team that basically does it. And now the Brewers are being run by a former Rays guy, which is It's not fun in the moment, obviously, to trade Corbin Burns or even to trade Jorge Polanco. But you got to be sort of realistic, which is in Burns' case, we weren't going to sign him after this year because he's going to make $200 million. The Brewers aren't going to be in position to give that kind of contract out. In Polanco's case, it's more about, is he going to have value after this year to us or in a trade scenario? And I think they really felt, at least, people I've talked to felt like they were worried at the trade deadline. Like, let's say we keep Polanco at second base. We use Julian mostly at DH, which is perfectly straightforward. You can do that. They did it last year at times.
The 500 or 600 at-bats that you're taking away from Polanco aren't going to Julian. I think that's one of the things that I would say maybe 100
It's not that they're going to Julian. It's just that they're going to Julian while he's at second base.
I guess.
Instead of at DH, basically. Okay. Yeah. But where they're really going, theoretically, soon-ish, they hope, is to Brooks Lee, which is by June, let's say. Brooks Lee might be in position to jump into the lineup like Julian, like Lewis, like Wallner last year, midsummer or earlier. And it's going to probably be at second base because you have Royce Lewis at third base and Correa at shortstop. Well, their worry, I think, with Polanco was by the time Lewis is ready, let's say it's June, which is optimistic probably, then he plays second base with some Julian in there. Julian's either playing first base, depending on what Kirillov's situation is, or Julian just goes back to being, half and half with DH second base. Well, then, okay, you've still got Polanco at that point. He's seemingly a pretty good trade chip, except what if he's hurt? Or what if he's just not that good? They were really worried about the likelihood or the chance of his trade value, which was not overwhelming to begin with, but I think they got pretty good value. I think even you agreed with that.
I agree that they came out
big picture sense.
Overall organizational value, they got good at.
Right.
They just didn't get better for next year.
Right.
So, right.
But they were worried if we try to trade him in July and he's on the injured list again with an ankle or a leg or whatever, he won't have really any trade value. I mean, we'd be lucky to get Justin Topa, the reliever they got, just on his own or whatever, sure. And then let alone during the offseason. And so in terms of why they acted now, I will also say that it was very clear. I mean, if you go back and listen to our show at the beginning of the offseason, even before the payroll stuff and the TV stuff really came to the forefront, when we were just kind of doing the math on roster spots and lineup spots, Polanco was at the top of everyone's list as a trade candidate because he was 30, he was nearing the end of his contract, he's got multiple good young players at the same position, either in the majors or knocking on the door to the majors. And they, you got the injuries and all that. It's not a surprise that they tried to trade him. I think, honestly, they spent basically 3 months, this period where we were saying there was nothing going on, trying to get a legit kind of mid-rotation starting pitcher or better for him, and just basically...
I think a lot of those conversations centered around Polanco and Burns, to be honest with you. I think Corbin Burns and Polanco were. I think the Twins had multiple conversations with the Brewers about Burns, and I think one of the key pieces in that was going to be Polanco.
But why would the Brewers do that?
Well, I think they were also looking for additional prospects similar to what they ended up getting, but they needed some infield help. Their infield is not in great shape.
I mean, I don't think Jorge Polanco is going to move the needle one bit on a Corbin Burns trade package. I mean, look what they ended up getting. 2 young players.
No, they got 2 young players.
And a draft pick.
They ended up doing, no, you're right.
Right.
They're still hurting for some of their middle infield for 2024.
But what I think the Twins found was, they were talking to Seattle, because Seattle had some very good young pitching. Well, Seattle wasn't going to trade you Bryce Miller or Brian Wu, let alone George Kirby or somebody like that, or Logan Gill. I mean,
agreed.
Why would they? If we were a Seattle Mariners podcast, we would laugh at that, basically. And so I think they spent 3 months trying to do that, whether it was for Polanco, with multiple teams, you could do that. Because there was interest in him, obviously. Or attaching Polanco with Kepler, or attaching Polanco to fill-in-the-blank prospect. And they just realized, at least to their liking, we can't turn him, even plus something else, into a playoff-caliber starting pitcher.
This is something we've talked about for years in the offseason. It's a lot harder to make a trade major league player for major league player than it is to make a trade major league player for prospects.
Right.
That prospects become sort of the currency by which you end up
They're like
buying
draft
and
picks
selling
in other sports.
Buying and selling major league players. That becomes easier. At some point you give up on, listen, we're just having trouble finding a fit between another major league team, another competitive major league team that wants a good player like Polanco, but is willing to give up a good pitcher in return. And I mean, that's a rare thing that you can find something like that. And then, if you can't find that, then it makes more sense to say, okay, well, let's sell Polanco for prospects and let's buy our our mid rotation or our playoff caliber rotation starter for prospects.
Right. And I think they basically blended that together. Ultimately, there's a 4-player return plus some payroll space, which they'll probably turn into at least a 5th player that you can sort of loop into that trade. The 4-player, we can just talk about it, I guess. But the 4 players were Gabriel Gonzalez, who's a 20-year-old corner outfield prospect, top 100 on some lists, just outside the top 100 on other lists. So I guess we'll call him a borderline top 100 prospect. Darren Bowen, who was a 13th round pick 18 months ago, who kind of fits what the Twins look for, which is a big right-handed college starter from a smaller school who throws low 90s, and they think they can get him throwing mid 90s and has some good promise. He's probably a B- level prospect. I think he was 13th in the Mariners system, which is a pretty decent system. I'd say he's probably somewhere in that range for the Twins, somewhere in the 15 to 20 range. And then 2 major leaguers, which is the blending of this thing. Like, to me, if you have just gotten Gabriel Gonzalez and Darren Bowen for Jorge Polanco, it would have been exactly what you described, which is, all right, they tried to make a major league for major league swap. There wasn't really a fit, sort of predictably or expectedly. And then they just said, all right, let's just get the best prospects we can for him in terms of just overall value bringing into the organization. We'll clear his salary, and then we'll just move forward. Instead, they did that. And they got 2 major league starting pitchers, 34-year-old Anthony DiSclafani. God,
it's DiSclafani, right?
Yeah. Yes. Edit that out. DiSclafani.
Disco T? Somebody told
me. Yeah,
us
that's his nickname. I like that better. Anthony DiSclafani. It's not even that difficult of a name. I don't know what's tripping me up about it. Anti-Italian discrimination, probably something like that. Who's 34. We talked about him a lot. 2 off seasons ago when he was a free agent, coming off a really nice season where he made 30+ starts with the Giants, and we were like, he'd be a pretty good mid-rotation option for the Twins here if they were trying to fill in some rotation spots. He got a 3-year, $36 million deal to re-sign with the Giants, which was above what obviously the Twins would have been paying, and he was basically injured for had an ankle problem in the first season, and then last year he made like 18 or 19 starts and was at times reasonably effective, but then missed the last 2 seasons with a flexor or elbow strain, basically. Right, yeah. And so they added him.
Totally clear he's healthy coming into this year.
Yeah, I mean, Falvey said, we believe he's ready to go for spring training. That's medical stuff, and we talked to him and everything. But yeah, we'll see. He's 34 also, so.
By way of kind of proving that there's question marks about him, the Twins are only paying $4 million of the $12 million that
he's owed $12 million. Yeah. The Mariners had already acquired him like 3 weeks earlier from the Giants, who, like I said, had signed him to that 3-year deal originally, as part of the Robbie Ray, Mitch Haniger sort of bad contract swap. Right. He was the third piece of that, and in that deal, the Giants paid half of his $12 million salary. Like, they included $6 million in cash to Seattle as part of that trade to balance the ledgers for those deals. So then, as part of this trade, the Mariners basically just flipped him to the Twins. They're including the $6 million that the Giants originally sent them and tossing in another $2 million to kind of sweeten the pot for the Twins. So the Twins' investment in DiSclafani, I said it right that time.
There you go.
Congratulations! Throw me a parade. I said
this is where we need that little button bar we had. I could have hit the little audio.
Golf clap. DiSclafani. It's not a hard name. It's no harder than Gleeman, really. I mean, it's they're only paying him essentially a 1-year, $4 million deal. And the way I looked at it, we talked about this on the Patreon too. If they had just signed Anthony DiSclafani to a 1-year, $4 million deal, now I'm just showing off, by the way, that I've mastered the pronunciation of his name. If the Twins last week had just signed, if he were a free agent, to a 1-year, $4 million deal, it's not a deal anybody or signing anybody would be excited about, but that would be right on the money. If anything, that's a little lower than I would expect him to get. It's more on the Matt Shoemaker side as opposed to the Dylan Bundy or Jay Happ side, which these are not deals that worked out well necessarily. And so they get that in the trade, which he slots into the 5th spot in the rotation if healthy, which then can push Louie Varland either to AAA as starter depth or to the bullpen. And then they also, and I would say this, the 4th piece, but it's probably the second most important piece really behind Gonzalez in the trade, is a 32-year-old reliever named Justin Topa. That one I got right. Justin Topa.
There you go.
Thank you for being very easy to pronounce.
When I first saw it, I'd be honest with you, I wasn't sure if it was Topa or Topa.
Okay, yeah, I could go there. It's Topa. Who is a guy who has bounced around quite a bit and has his own injury problems, but really had his first breakthrough year, stayed healthy through like 70 innings for the Mariners, was a 7th and 8th inning guy for them, for a contending team. Gets a lot of ground balls with a mid-90s sinker, has a pretty decent slider that can get some swings and misses. He throws strikes for the most part. He gives up very few homers because everything's getting pounded into the ground off that sinker. That's an addition. He's only making $1.25 million via arbitration, and if that breakthrough proves for real at age 32, they have him under team control for 2025 and 2026, probably at $3 million and $5 million. I think there's a decent chance that he's the most valuable component of this deal
at the end of the day, like
not
10
only
years from now.
Yeah, right. Not only
yeah.
for the Twins, but for everything. Like if Polanco has more injury issues, obviously, and adding him to the bullpen. So what did they get for Polanco? Well, they got a borderline top 100 prospect. They got a second sort of intriguing mid-round recent draftee prospect. They got a fifth starter, which is something they'd been searching for, if only to just provide depth and push Varland out of the number 5 spot to begin the season. And then they got, a 7th inning setup man caliber reliever who potentially could be in the bullpen for 3 total years. And they got about $6.5 million in spending room. Now, again, there's no salary cap, but it was pretty clear.
It's part getting rid of a player while you still have a year of control.
Yes.
It's part salary dump. I mean, it is. They did this in part to give themselves more room to spend on
the only reason
additional player.
Saying salary dump strikes me as not, to my ears, bad, is if they don't spend that money, that's a salary dump to me. They didn't make this trade for the $6 million.
Fair.
And
it
seems fairly clear that they intend to spend the $6 million, like quickly, within 2 weeks.
Yep.
And so to me, it's more just reallocating the same resources, basically. It's adding flexibility. It's basically adding a fifth player to this trade. If it was Polanco traded to the Mariners for Darren Bowen, just straight up, that's a salary dump to me. If they didn't spend that money.
If they don't spend that
money.
Okay, that's fair.
It's semantic, whatever.
It's fair.
But in terms of what you brought up on the Patreon, which I think was a valid point, which is your first one of it's the year. But I would say the year, but that's not that insulting. It's only February.
About
the millennium.
Sure.
The century. Which is that, okay, good value. I think we were both agreed on that. How much we viewed it that way is subjective, obviously. But I'll put it this way, just in terms of pure player value, it's quite a bit more than like the baseline expectation for a Polanco trade to me. But your point, which I think is fair, was, okay, are they a better team today than they were the day before the trade?
Still doesn't do what you're trying to get done this offseason. Right.
Now, I think that's debatable. I think it's more debatable than you think. I think, to me, Polanco, nobody's a bigger Polanco fan than me over the last decade. Like I've said this a million times. I think he's the single most underrated or underappreciated player of the target field era. I think he has been either the best or one of the top 3 players on the Twins in so many more seasons than anybody would remember or even in the moment think. I mean, he was the team MVP one year. He was the all-star shortstop one year. I mean, I think he's a clear Twins Hall of Famer. I know there's some debate about that. It's years off, obviously. But I think, a switch-hitting middle infielder with power who can draw walks, who has some speed, who, by the way, is beloved in the clubhouse. And we saw this year, but we've seen it when he went from shortstop to second. He will play anywhere they want him to play, even when it's not so pretty. Basically, if they think he's better at a different position, he's willing to do it. Good guy, good player, sort of a perfect secondary building block for a team in my mind. But what's the actual impact on this year's team? Well, you remove him from the mix, like we said, at second base. Right. Julian slides into second. A Julian Farmer platoon at second, I think, is pretty nifty just in terms of roster management and production, probably. We saw that for half of last year when Polanco was injured, basically. And if Brooks Lee's ready by the summer, he was going to be the second baseman long term anyway. And so is the lineup significantly worse having removed Polanco? Maybe for a few months.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know that
a lot of that depends on Brooks Lee, right? Obviously,
and
right?
Julian.
Ultimately, yeah, Julian a little bit, but ultimately, those 500 or 600 at bats that Polanco might have got, or 400 to 500 at bats, let's say, given they maybe hurt, right? For part of it,
400, let's say. Yeah,
I don't know.
I get where you're going.
Right? Yeah, I mean, he was fairly healthy the last 4 months of the year last year, right?
Well, but he played 80 games.
Off the surgery, right? If those 400 or 500 at bats are going to be given not to Julian, they're going to be given to the last guy on or the 10th or 11th or 12th.
See, but I don't think that's true.
Right, true. Now that 10th or 11th person might be Brooks Lee.
Right, but I don't think that's who's going to get those at bats. I think you're going to use Julian and Farmer, and then potentially Lee midseason at second base. First of all, Brooks Lee actually profiles as if things go well, as a similar player to Jorge Polanco.
Sure.
Switch hitter. Not a 30 homer guy, but a 15, 20 homer guy. Control the strike zone, hit for average, probably better defensively. We'll see. But see, I think they're going to sign a hitter.
I think so too.
That is essentially going to take those at bats by way of first base, DH, left field.
Yeah, it's just.
Do you know what I mean?
No, I agree with you. Actually, I think what they're going to be
at least at the beginning of the year.
I think what we're going to see them do is try and bring in somebody else who can put up similar offensive numbers to Polanco, but not at a middle infield position. Right?
Because they no longer need that.
Which is fairly easy to acquire. There's a lot of DH types out there that could maybe play a little bit of first base, maybe a little bit of DH. Essentially kind of the Donovan Solano role, Donovan Solano could kind of replace Polanco's production over if you Donovan Solano
which is, by the way,
did last year.
Why?
Also maybe somebody who can also replace his veteran leadership to some extent.
Which is that entire thing is why people like us emphasize the value of up the middle players.
Sure, right.
This
is why it's not a problem to have too many middle infielders. Right. Yeah, right.
But what a big part of Jorge Polanco's value over the years, even last year, was that he hit like a corner guy. He hit like a left fielder or a first baseman, which is to say, 275, 20 homers, 800 OPS, 115 OPS plus, which means he's 15%. But he played a middle infield spot. Well, if playing the middle infield spot ceases having huge value simply because you have other guys who can, Julian, Brooks Lee, etc., Austin Martin, who can play the middle infield spot, well, then you're kind of just evaluating him based on his bat. And his bat is good, but it's only really good or great compared to up the middle players. Right. To your point, Donovan Solano, who was a $2 million mid-spring pickup last year, and did have a good, by his standards, year, so maybe that's not the baseline. Right. But Donovan Solano, I think, had a 110 OPS plus. Well, Polanco had a 115 or something like that OPS plus. Right, and so one could play second base, and if needed, third base or shortstop. The other was like an emergency option anywhere but first base, and not, by the way, all that good at first base. So that's the difference. But in terms of where this leaves the Twins roster, you're removing Polanco, but really all you're doing is sort of sliding Julian from DH to second base, which is going to be a drop-off defensively. But I think Julian improved a lot defensively. The question is, does he have a cap to his improvement? Yeah. Is there going to be a point where it's that's as good as he's going to be?
Also, Polanco's probably decreasing his value.
Right. That's he never fared that well, even at second base. He fared poorly at short in terms of metrics, but his metrics at second.
And I agree. I think ultimately you're right. I think given the roster right now, those 500 at bats are not going to a particularly good hitter, right? On the other hand, if they end up acquiring somebody, and at that point, I'm willing to praise that acquisition.
Sure, I get
as opposed to praising this move because I see some future acquisition. It's going to depend a little bit on the guy that they bring in. Just so
for sure,
clear, right?
But yeah, if Polanco were not traded, then it's the guys are going to move around. I mean, it's not like Polanco would only play second; he'd also DH, and vice versa for Julian. But now you remove Polanco, so to begin the season, you take Julian from a primary DH role to a primary second role, and Farmer platoons with him, which I think can be a good setup. We'll talk about Farmer in a minute too here, but that opens the DH spot. Their DH spot is wide open right now, and it's not even clear to me if the season started today, who the DH would be. Right. And so what that means is you're free to just pursue hitting unattached to other skills. Now, obviously, you would love to sign a guy who can play center field, who can be a good left fielder, but if all you need is a DH, or like you said, someone who can stand at first base or left field twice a week or whatever, Jorge Soler types or whatever, well, then you just need to sort of come close to Polanco's overall offensive contributions from just a bat, and that's not that difficult, particularly because now they have $6 to $10 million.
I'll also add this.
Theoretically.
They don't know exactly what they're getting from Kirilloff, and they don't know what they're getting from Kirilloff, certainly versus left-handed pitching, right? So if you bring in somebody who can play, the truth is that the type of DH I might see them targeting, it won't, first of all, right now, at least, they don't have the money to target a really good DH, right? So if you're thinking, we're going to get somebody like a Nelson Cruz, a Jorge Soler,
See, I think they do. I don't think those guys. JD Martinez is not going to get much more than $10 million. I don't think. Jorge Soler, I don't think.
Justin Turner just got 13.5, right?
Yeah, but he can play third base and first base.
I don't think they're going to try and bring in that level of player. What they're going to try and do is bring in a Donovan Solano level player, or somebody maybe a little better than.
I think it'll be better than Donovan Solano. I mean, if they wanted Donovan Solano, they could have signed him today.
No, I'm not suggesting they're going to sign Donovan Solano.
But my point is, even if it is Donovan Solano, which would be the lower end of any spectrum of addition.
Yeah, and I'm actually talking more about the role, right? They're not going to bring in a full-time DH role. They're going to bring in somebody who is going to be part-time DH and then can maybe do some other things someplace else.
Right. I mean, I actually think it'll...
For 400 at-bats.
The person will be like a corner outfielder that they'll just put at DH someday. I mean, they're going to cycle guys through.
I think first base is also the other.
Right. I agree.
Right.
But all I'm saying is it's going to be hard to sign anyone, even in the $5 to $10 million range, for that type of skill set, a right-handed hitter, corner outfield, first base, DH type of guy, who's not an above-average hitter relative to the league. And so, to me, is the lineup worse? Yeah, today, because they haven't done the, sort of follow-up move to this, which is, okay, that's fine. I have faith that they're going to do some sort of follow-up move. Now, we could sit here a week from now and go, boy, that was a horrible follow-up move. But I don't know that removing Polanco from the lineup, shifting Julian to second base, preparing for Brooks Lee as sort of your backup plan there, and then bringing in we can go through the list because I wrote about it yesterday, but one of a dozen or so, that I would say would be acceptable veteran free agent bats.
Yeah.
Actually makes the lineup that much worse.
No, I agree.
Because you're basically just replacing Polanco's offense with whatever bat you add. And, again, I think Polanco was a great all-around player, but the all-around part is sort of out of the equation when his ability to play second base isn't as relevant as it was to them.
Right,
so
exactly.
That's the domino effect to this is now they got a clear spot in the lineup that's open. They've eliminated the need for that spot necessarily to be attached to skills other than hitting ability. Now they just need to find somebody who can have good hitting ability.
Right, yes.
And that seems very simplistic. But I do think we'll see. I mean, JD Martinez last season signed, I think, for $13 million with the Dodgers. Now he had a good year, but he's also 36 years old. Jorge Soler would not be unsigned right now if his market was much above that type of money, in my opinion.
I mean, I can still see him getting a multi-year deal. I can
Maybe.
still see him getting a 2 or 3 year deal that kind of takes him out of the Twins.
Yeah, well, I guess later in the show
I would pick it to be somebody a level lower than that, like a Carlos Santana, somebody who can play a little first base, play a little DH.
Right.
A veteran presence to replace Polanco's veteran presence, like that.
Right.
Sort of the love child of Nelson Cruz and Donovan Solano would be he brings Nelson Cruz's gravitas while Donovan
Nelson
Solano's
Cruz it's a few years ago, but I don't know that inflation on salaries has been that high obviously since
especially
then.
not on DHs.
Right. Well, that's the point.
It's just weird because there's so many more DH spots than there used to be.
Yeah, but there's never been a time when other positional flexibility and defensive skill has been valued higher relative to just hitting.
Yep.
You see that in the league-wide splits among left fielders and first basemen, which are often below shortstops or center fielders or at the same level. 20 years ago, it was the best hitters were at first base, the second best hitters were.
You got a guy at shortstop who can pick it.
Right. And so, Santana I think would be on the low end with Solano basically, but that's the bar that they have to sort of clear now, and then beyond that, and so I think Topa has a chance to be a significant addition to a bullpen now, by the way, that
agree.
in my mind is a strength. it's not household names beyond Duran, but I don't know that.
There's certainly questions about, whether Stewart can stay healthy.
Right.
Topa had one breakthrough season. Is he
Absolutely.
really that guy?
But those are what you're always going to get those.
Thielbar's
In a bullpen, you're always going to get those questions.
You're absolutely right.
That's how bullpens work. Right. Go look at the Rays bullpen or whatever bullpen you thought was impressive for the last 3 years. It's all dudes who are waiver claims and injured starters and, scrap heap pickups.
And this organization has sort of treated that as such.
Absolutely.
They have not made bullpen a priority.
When you look at the bullpen and you have Duran, who's one of the best, end game guys in the league. You have Brock Stewart, who, when healthy, was phenomenal last year. You have Griffin Jacks. You have Caleb Thielbar. You have Topa.
Yep.
They're still hoping that Stallmont can add something. They're still hoping that Alcala can add something. And then they have Cody Funderburk. And then they have some guys in the minors, too. Projection-wise, I know that even before they added Topa, Fangraphs, I think, had him as like the number 3 bullpen in the American League. I'm guessing this, if anything, has boosted them a little bit. And so when you say, I don't necessarily disagree with the idea that I don't think they're better for having made this trade for 2024, but I just think the idea that they got worse, I would push back on that a little bit, because I think, in terms of they traded a really good second baseman for some less good pitching. Yeah. But the really good second baseman part, the actual impact of losing that is lessened because you have Julian and Brooks Lee and Austin Martin and Kyle Farmer and Willie Castro or whatever. They got so many guys who can play second base and hit a little bit.
Look, I think they're doing a nice job of shuffling their assets. Don't get me wrong, especially if they go out and pick up a bat.
Well, right. That to me that's the key.
That's it, and that's my point. I'll praise that.
Right.
I'm not going to praise this. And by the way, I also wasn't sure. It wasn't clear to me why, if they think those DHs are available, why they didn't sign one of those last week and then make the trade for Polanco. Trade away Polanco, right? Is that
because you didn't know until now that you would get a $7 million clearance in the Polanco trade? Well, I mean, that's what they've been talking to them about.
I mean, that might be.
They've been talking to Seattle for 3 months.
I mean, you're going to get some. You can get. Listen, anytime you want to trade away Polanco, you can trade away Polanco for clearance.
Not to get 2 pitchers and a top 100 prospect.
Well, maybe not. Right.
That's what they've been trying to do. I mean, they've been talking about Polanco with Seattle for 3 years, and certainly for 3 months. Right. The monetary clearance was the creative aspect of this trade. I think that's not. I don't think.
And I would suggest that DeSclafani was one of the to some extent included as much from the Seattle side as from the Twins side to help balance that.
Maybe, but either way, the Twins were going to have to go out and get a 5th starter. It wasn't going to be Louie Varland to start the season. It just wasn't. That was going to cost money. Right. I mean, I don't know how you bring in a major league starting pitcher without spending.
If they would have just traded him for the prospects and the reliever, right, and DeSclafani was not included in it, we probably would have said, okay, hey, they saved $11 million, but now they're going to have to go spend 5 of it on a starting pitcher. But I'm not sure that starting pitcher would have necessarily been much different than DeSclafani in terms of expectations for the 2024
season. Although I bet he would have cost more than $4 million. Maybe, all right, let's read our first ads here, because then we have a lot. This did not go in the order in which I intended, which my OCD really prevents. But I'm flowing with it. I'm like Bruce Lee, be like water.
There you go.
That's me. People compare me to Bruce Lee a lot.
Right. Yeah.
He still
you just take whatever container you're presented with.
That's
you
right.
Just form into that container.
Yeah, it's like you put a goldfish in a bathtub and they look like me. That's what happens. They get big and fat like me.
Our first sponsor is BetterHelp, which we always have. Speaking of very Zen mindset.
Yeah, that's me.
I will say this as somebody who has, sought therapy in the past.
Just for dealing with me.
Right. Who continues to need therapy. One of the challenges, listen, the biggest challenge is just deciding you're going to do it. Yes.
But then from there, the big challenge is I need a kind of smooth path or an unencumbered path, because anything that bumps you off that path on the day you decide you could use some help can stop you from getting the help, and then you might go 6 more months before
and that path can be super bumpy. Right. And what BetterHelp does is paves that path for you and makes it very straightforward.
So they set it up where you can talk to real licensed therapists who can specialize in whatever it is that you want to talk to somebody about or you need assistance with. And they can set it up. You want to do a video chat? They got video chats. You want to do a phone call? They got that. If you don't want to do either of those things, you can just type with someone and do a live chat with somebody. They will kind of customize it to whatever your comfort level and desire is on that front. They can set it up typically a lot sooner and with fewer steps.
Less expensive.
And less expensive also than
more flexible.
Traditional path to therapy. And if you go to betterhelp.com/Gleeman today, you will get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, H-E-L-P. BetterHelp.com/Gleeman.
Become your own soulmate, whether you're looking for it or not. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Gleeman.
HelloFresh is our next sponsor, and John really likes to show off on Twitter.
Yeah, I do.
He would do it on Instagram if he was on Instagram too.
I have started Instagram.
Oh boy!
Yeah.
I
just forget it.
The meals that you can make with HelloFresh are very Instagrammable, and even as someone, our whole household contains no one who knows how to cook, and yet when we've done HelloFresh, when we've actually cooked our own meal with HelloFresh, even I'm like, this plate looks pretty good.
Yes, it does.
And yet John and Chrissy, they actually know the basics of cooking, and so their plates look restaurant quality. And that's what you can get with HelloFresh, which is they will send you. You can go on and you choose the menu you want. If you are a vegetarian, they have that. If you have kids, they have kid-friendly menus. Yes. If you on a specific diet that you're going for something, they have that. Or you can
just quick and easy is one of the options. Yeah, right.
And you can also just pick and choose. They send you all the ingredients you need, sort of portioned out, fresh to your door, dry iced, and everything is ready to go. And everything's
a little cardboard sheet,
a giant
all the instructions,
recipe,
all the pictures. Yeah.
But it also has like literal step-by-step instructions with pictures, which is very helpful.
Here's how to julienne potatoes.
Right.
Here's what ginger looks like.
That was the one I always use, which is I needed the picture because it was like slice the ginger, and I was like, what is ginger? And there was a picture of ginger, so it really helped. And so you can get healthier meals. High quality meals. You can also just, it's fun sometimes to cook your own stuff.
And I also mentioned they also now have breakfast. And I've had both the heated sandwiches that you have for breakfast. And then yesterday, Chrissy was like, I got to run. Thank God there's a banana nut muffin from HelloFresh sitting in the fridge.
So
fantastic.
You go to HelloFresh.com/Gleeman free. And use
all one word.
And use the code Gleeman free. And the reason it's Gleeman free is you get free breakfast for life. You get one breakfast item in every shipment box for however long your subscription is active. That's free breakfast for life at HelloFresh.com/Gleeman free and use the promo code Gleeman free.
HelloFresh tagline is America's #1 meal kit.
Okay. So let's see. We talk a little bit more about the Polanco trade, but it's a 4-for-1 trade. I will argue that their intention is to make it at minimally a 5-for-1 trade, possibly a 6-for-1 trade by using that money. But yes, we'll see. Maybe they tricked me, but I'm confident that they're going to do it.
Everything I've heard outside of that organization is that their payroll, at opening day will be higher than their payroll was before they made the Polanco trade.
Which was like 125.
Which essentially means they will spend that money.
Right. They cleared 6 to 7. It went from, it was 125 the morning of the Polanco trade.
Yes.
After the trade, it was roughly like 118 and change. Let's call it 118. So my assumption is at minimum, they will spend the 6 or 7 million to get it back to 125. And then to your point, there's probably still another 5 million, let's say, of leeway. Yeah. To me, if you're at 10 or 11 million, now they may view that as wanting to add 2 hitters.
I think they do.
Yeah. I mean, I think the DH spot is something that you could sort of attempt to fill, not with a pure DH, but with a guy you say, this is going to be our primary, 500 at bat guy. And then I think they would like to find a right-handed bat specifically that can be paired with Wallner, Kirilloff, Kepler in a platoon situation against left-handers, which that person needs to be able to play corner outfield and or first base and can also be part of the DH mix. But I think that could be 2 different guys. I also just think there's some scenario where they just re-sign Michael Taylor with some of that money or all of that money.
There is.
And he could play center field if Buxton's out. He could also be a left-handed masher as a right-handed hitter in left field or right field, take over for Wallner in left field against lefties. Then he's not a slugger, although he did hit 20 homers last year. But, theoretically, a Taylor-Buxton-Kepler defense is as good as you will ever get. And so I think that's an option, too. There's some flexibility. We can, in a minute here, we'll read, I listed a dozen guys I think would be in the mix to sort of bring in for that money. But I think we talked a lot about, I don't want this to be a send-off for Polanco as if we're saying, good riddance, or we're, not appreciating what he was. We spent a lot of time on that on the Patreon side. I think Polanco was tremendously underrated. I think he was a hugely valuable all-around player. I think, he was the longest tenured player along with Kepler. They both signed when they were 16 years old in 2009. I'll always remember the moment we were in Houston, I think, before the Astros series, and they came out to the podium together, and Kepler did most of the talking. But
yeah, right.
It's the most I've ever heard Kepler talk, by the way.
Right.
And he was saying just how proud he was for himself and the team to, snap the playoff losing streak and be in position where they're playing the Astros. But also he said, I've been with this guy for 15 years next to me, pointing to Jorge Polanco. We were roommates when we were 17 years old.
Right.
Like we came to this country from Germany and Dominican Republic, respectively.
Yeah. Internationally signed at 16 years old.
16 years old.
Yeah, right.
They've been through it together. These guys, they've been on teams together for half their lives, basically. Right. And to be sitting there at a podium in front of a big playoff game where they're both making, real money and they're both stars on a playoff team. And it was very fun to watch Kepler, who is not normally the most loquacious speaker, basically said, I'm so proud of this guy next to me. And then Polanco, who's even less of a loquacious, basically said, you too, bro, you too. And it was just so cute to me. Yeah. And so I don't want to, it's 2 weeks before spring training. There's going to be a lot of moving parts. The natural reaction to this trade, as you can see, is what's next? Yeah, what is the domino effect? Yep. I don't want to be lost in that, the idea of how good Jorge Polanco was, what he meant to the Twins organization, how long he spent in the Twins organization. I think if he's healthy, he's going to be really good for Seattle.
I think one of the underrated aspects of Polanco, beyond his performance, is also in part because English is not his primary language, right?
Right.
How much of a leader he was in that clubhouse, especially among some of the Latin players.
Yep.
That
for sure.
I think he was so reasonable as a veteran of the organization, and as somebody who played through a lot of injuries, performed very well, played up the middle, both took on things like shortstop when he wasn't a shortstop.
He played wherever they wanted him to play,
and performed at a high level throughout it. I think in general he was. I think it's underrated how much they feel like they're going to miss his leadership in that locker room.
Sure. But I think with that said, the idea of how do we replace how good Jorge Polanco has been on the field, I think there's a very good chance that Jorge Polanco wasn't going to be able to replicate that at this point of his career anyway, and that's a big part of this trade. I will always remember, we talked about this on the Patreon, but I will always remember when you say 20 years from now, 20, I'll not have any memory of anything. 10 years from now, when you say, what was it like to watch Jorge Polanco as a player? What will immediately pop in my mind, I hope, is him batting left-handed against a right-handed pitcher at Target Field.
His strong side.
Yep. And swinging and missing, some changeup or something out of the zone and missing it by 8 feet and spinning himself into the ground, losing his helmet, falling to one knee. And, everyone there thinking, is this a guy who's ever played baseball before? And then one pitch later, ripping a fastball into the right field corner for a, game tying double or something like that. I mean, I never have seen anybody go from looking completely lost and inept physically, like clearly something's wrong with his ankle, which often was the case, or his knee or his leg or whatever, to, oh yeah, he's a clutch player. Like the number of walk-offs and game-tying hits and just good at-bats that he put together, particularly late in his career when he added some plate discipline, was, I just think, so underrated. And he was just such a good – he is, to me, like, he's not a star. He's not a Hall of Fame candidate. He's not any of that. But he is such the epitome to me of a secondary piece of a championship caliber team, which is like up the middle player, does everything well.
Lunch pail guy,
yes,
good in the locker room, and like you said, willing to do everything to the point where he was called up when he was out of single A.
Yeah, he was 20.
To pull up to be a utility role for like a week.
One of the strangest Terry Ryan moves.
21-year-old, 20-year-old or something like that called out to single A to kind of be up there. And then the next year, they did it again. Right. They called him for like a week and a half or something like that.
The other thing is, we talked about this at the time, I remember 10 years ago or whatever it was, which is he was a shortstop like in the low minors. Then they realized, hey, he's not really a shortstop. They moved him to second base, I remember, at Double A and Triple A. And he played like exclusively second base at Triple A for the entire first half of 2016 2016. I don't remember what season. 2016.
And then they called him up as
they called him up as a shortstop because the Nishioka, Plouffe, Dozier
Right.
contingent just weren't capable of playing shortstop around that time.
Right.
And they called him up as purely a shortstop. He hadn't played shortstop in like a year at that point, but he played shortstop, and he was the starting all-star shortstop, by the way, in 2019. And then a year later, they said, we want you to play second base. And he said, absolutely, I'll play second base. And then as his last position switch in the middle of last year, because he had been out and that had opened the door for Julian at second base. And Julian you couldn't remove Julian's bat from the lineup. Right. And he had improved enough at second base where they thought he's certainly more playable at second base than he would be at third base from a throwing standpoint. And they came to Polanco once Polanco came back off the IL and basically said, we want you to play third base because there's a rookie that's basically taking your job at second base. And we think you will be less bad at third base, even though you've never played third base before. And it's my understanding that he said, absolutely, I'll go out there right now and take ground balls at third base. And I think that sort of, as someone who's covered the team now for a few years, that is the sort of stuff that I think gets underappreciated because not all guys are like that. Yeah. And by the way,
it's appreciated by the team. It's appreciated by the players, right? Yeah.
And you might have looked at him and went, it wasn't pretty at third base. Right. Well, it was prettier than it would have been with Julian at third base, and and
when he's not standing in front of a microphone after talking about it.
Well, that's the other thing,
right? Yeah, you don't understand. You forget how important that is. Right. You just start taking it for granted.
Okay, so just to touch on the Seattle guys very quickly. Again, we went over Gonzalez as a prospect and all this stuff very much in depth on the Patreon. So I would subscribe to that and listen. You can actually listen to that for free if you subscribe. Yeah. I think if you're ranking how the Twins perceive the value of these players in this trade, I think undeniably Gabby Gonzalez is number one. He's a top 100 prospect in their mind. 20 years old, crushed low A, struggled a little bit at high A in the second half of last year, but again, he was 19 at high A. It's like just being there is emblematic of being a good prospect. I tried to reach out to not only Twins people, but people from other organizations to get a sense of like how good is this guy as a prospect. And the spectrum of responses I got was incredible. Some people were like, this guy swings at everything. He's 5'10". He's put on weight. He might not even be a right fielder. He might be first base DH. He might be a good hitter, but I don't really see him as a good prospect. Other people from other organizations that I trust their opinion on prospects were like, oh, this guy's one of the 50 best prospects in baseball. This time next year, he's going to be an elite prospect. Right. He absolutely crushes the ball. The elite combination of power, but also bat to ball ability. He's not a big strikeout guy. And yeah, he swings at everything, but he's 19.
I think if you break down this trade and you start diving into it, one of the reasons they made this trade, when they made this trade, before they actually needed to make this trade to free up the money, is they really like Gabby Gonzalez.
Right. Now, almost by definition, a 19-year-old prospect is a boom or bust prospect. There is a very decent chunk of the Gabriel Gonzalez career outcome pie that didn't even make it to AAA, let alone become a regular in the majors. Yeah. But
he tore it up in low A and then got promoted mid-season to high A and hit 215. Right. Right. But he's 19.
There's also a chance that he's just a cleanup hitter 3 years from now, and he's just their cleanup hitter. I'll put it this way. This is the Jorge Polanco trade for now. Yeah. And probably it'll go down as, 10 years from now that this would be the Jorge Polanco trade. Right. But he's the only guy in this deal that could change it to the Gabriel Gonzalez trade. Yeah, right. Then I think...
Because he's the only guy named Gabriel Gonzalez.
That's true. Justin Topa cannot make it the Gabriel Gonzalez trade unless he changes his name.
It's true.
Unless he changes his name. That'd be funny. All four guys in the trade change their name.
To Gabriel Gonzalez.
Be better than saying DeSclafani 100 times. Sorry. I feel like I'm going to have to... My introduction to this guy 2 weeks from now in Fort Myers is going to be, I'm sorry I've been botching your name on the podcast. I'm pretty convinced that the number 2 value in this trade from their standpoint was Topa, the reliever.
Yeah, I think so too.
Because he's under team control for 3 years. They really love the sinker slider, heavy ground ball, but some ability to miss bats and throw strikes. Is just such a traditional, prototypical setup man profile, which is what do you really want in a reliever? You love guys who throw hard. He throws mid-90s. You like guys who miss bats. Now, he doesn't miss bats like, Duran or anybody at this point, but he gets a strikeout an inning. But what you really want in a reliever is a guy who keeps the ball on the ground and does not give up home runs. Because as we saw, someone like Pagan, even when he was going well, was susceptible to one swing changing the game because he was a fly ball pitcher. Right. So I think Topa has a chance. Again, he's a breakthrough guy at 32. You never know how that's going to go. He's had some injuries. I really think there's a decent chance that he's like, their primary setup man for a lot of the year, or a Griffin Jacks level pitcher, basically.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping for. He's a lot older than Griffin Jacks, but that doesn't really matter.
Yeah, relievers, I don't care. I mean,
I agree with
there's
you.
a difference to me from a 22-year-old and a 38-year-old. But
it's funny because for 20 years I've been telling people, no, you got to pay attention to their age. Do you know what I mean? That's one of the things that I think casual baseball fans don't pay much attention to the age in general of prospects or everything else, or somebody they hear about. It's like, no, you really got to pay attention to their age. But when it comes to relievers, that's
right, because the development is not linear with relievers. Right. First of all, half of good relievers, probably more, were just guys who were on a starter path and just couldn't hack it or got hurt, and then one day someone went, "You're a reliever." By the way, you're on.
Yeah, they were good enough to hang around as a starter until they were 27 or 28, but they weren't good enough to become a starter.
By the way, Griffin Jacks, same thing. Right. And then the other half are just guys who, like Topa, had injury problems or couldn't get consistent, and then 1 year at AAA just tweak something, and all of a sudden they're a good reliever.
Look at Thielbar.
Right, exactly. So yeah, the third most valuable guy I think is probably a toss-up in their mind between DeSclafani and Bowen. And I think DeSclafani, if healthy, would almost be precisely the type of guy we'd be sort of advocating for them to get. Right. But it's just such a big question mark with his health. But when he's been a borderline playoff caliber starter when healthy, but certainly a third, fourth starter.
When they signed him for $336 at the time, we were like, boy, I would have signed him for $336.
Right. You know what I mean? That's why we're bad GMs.
Yeah, those first 2 years did not work out so well. Yeah, right.
I mean, he's a good pitcher. I mean, he's probably been kind of every other year. In the last 2 years, he's been hurt. But, if healthy, I think there's a decent chance he certainly gives them what Maeda gave them last year, something like that, which is like 100 and something innings of a league average-ish or better.
How much danger is there that we talked about this several times midseason? How much danger is there that they hang on to him too long?
Right. Right.
As a 1 year deal, a 1 year veteran deal that they want to retain some depth, etc. I think a lot of that might depend on how quickly somebody like Festa ends up developing.
The thing is, even
Balazovic takes a step forward, or Sands takes a step forward, or somebody like that.
Neither of those guys are starting, but Festa is starting. The other two aren't starters. Right. Balazovic, I don't think is taking a step forward towards much. Maybe the waiver wire. Please step onto the waiver wire, Jordan. We'll see. He's out of options. That's all I mean. I mean, what he does is make it so that they're not immediately relying on Louie Varland as the fifth starter. And that's not a problem because you don't think Louie Varland can handle that job. It's a problem because then if Louie Varland is your opening day fifth starter, one of the five starters is going to get hurt. By the way, realistically, 2, 3, or 4 of them are going to get hurt at some point during the season. And then who steps in? Well, then it's David Festa, Simon. Like, you have to be able, this is what they did last year when they acquired Lopez and they started Ober at AAA and Varland at AAA. It wasn't because they didn't think those guys were major league starters. It was because they wanted a sixth guy at AAA, a seventh guy at AAA for when the inevitable injuries happen. So DeSclafani, if nothing else, does that. It buys them some time to have to turn to the Varlands and Festas so they can be more of a midseason addition. I actually think I was a little surprised that they're now seemingly so focused on bats, which I think is reasonable. But I wouldn't mind one more functioning major league starter, although the problem is from a roster standpoint, unless you can stash them at AAA also, what do you really do there? Unless this comes down to if they can get somebody that's replacing Sonny Gray, then you go and get somebody to replace Sonny Gray. But I meant as a fourth or fifth starter type of guy. Right. That's why young starting pitching is so valuable. First of all, they're cheap and they throw hard, and you can dream on them. Yeah. But also, you can just stick them at AAA for a while. Yeah. You can't stick the DeSclafanis of the world at AAA for a while and sort of keep them cool in their heels. Okay, so in terms of what's next, we talked about this a little bit, but they're at like 118 in payroll, which is 20th out of 30 teams. They were like 17th the last few years. I think they're not totally out of the pitching game, but I think the focus would be on what we're talking about, which is corner bats and probably right-handed. Maybe center field in terms of Taylor. But that might just be specific to Michael A. Taylor. If he wants to come back on a 1-year, $7 million deal or something like that, I would be all for
Duvall's
that.
played some center field, and he kind of fits a little bit of that.
I don't think you'll like him in center field, but
No,
yes, you're right. He's played some. Right. Oh, were you there for this when I was at that side table on last Friday? I got Rocco all worked up. I got how.
So I stopped by there, but I was talking to other people.
Yeah, well, I turned at one point and you were behind me, so I was like,
yeah.
I didn't know how much you heard, but get Rosie going. They like to do on KFan. Mark Rosen, he's
easy. Rocco going.
Yeah, I tried to say to him that it was my theory, which is something we've discussed on this show.
Yes.
That his personal bar for what a acceptable level of center field defense is higher than most because he himself was a good center fielder.
Right.
And he immediately said, I don't think that's right. I don't think that's true. And I sort of went through some examples.
Because I've heard other people in the organization say that is true.
Well, I'm going to say it. And he said, did Derek tell you that? Which was great. And I wanted to be like, no, but yes. And he was like, Derek always tells me that, and I don't think it's true. And I want to be like, buddy, I think it's true. But it was a funny little. By the way, Rocco did a hour-long in studio interview with Dan Barrero right before Twins Fest last Thursday ago. And I thought it was phenomenal. And it is actually some of the questions you might think, that seems like something Gleeman would want to ask him because I sent Barrero some questions. One of them was something we've talked about on the show a ton, which is I'm of the belief that there's too big of a gap between on camera pre and post game Rocco that is 95% of the impression Twins fans get, and just Rocco, real personality Rocco. Right. And I've said this to Barrero. I've talked about it with Barrero. And so Barrero kind of asked him about that. And I thought he answered it. But in general, I thought the hour-long sort of 3-segment sit-down in studio face-to-face interview with Barrero stripped all that stuff away and made it kind of impossible for him not to show his real personality or something more closely resembling his real personality. He dropped an F-bomb accidentally at one point. He was making some jokes. And I thought I've said this to Rocco. Hi, Rocco. If he could show 10% more of that, I think the entire perception of him as a kind of robot manager would change. But it's not so fun to sit in front of the Bally camera 2 hours before a game and answer a question from me and Doe about why some guy's batting 6th instead of 7th or how long this guy is from coming off the IL. Like, those are not fun questions to answer when you're the face that has to go on TV. Right. Whereas as soon as that camera goes off, if you ask him even the same question, you get a much different vibe. And so I thought this was a very funny, but yeah, he rejected my premise.
Huh, interesting.
He said he thinks he values center field defense a lot, but his premise was that's correct to do that. And I don't think I value it any more or any less because I was a center fielder, which I believe he believes that because to him, his playing career is almost irrelevant to him. Like he never talks about it, even though he was a great prospect, even though he was a great center fielder before the health problems and all that. But yeah, it was funny because clearly Falvey is on our side of it.
Falvey has probably said that to him.
Yes. Yeah. And so he got all worked up. We were talking about Michael Taylor and Willie Castro and Buxton and Austin Martin and all this stuff, but I thought it was good. Let's read our last sponsor and then we can go through. I got 12 names we can banter about?
Banter about?
That's not the right.
That's right.
Bandy about.
Okay.
Yeah, DeSclafani. But first, let's read our last sponsor.
Let's talk a little bit about Raycon earbuds.
Yes, I used them the other day, in fact.
Did you? Really?
I was on a Zoom with Derek Falvey, and I used them because here's the beauty of Raycon earbuds. They're at a lower price point than some of the ones you may be familiar with. I would argue that they are at minimum as good and in some ways superior in terms of quality.
Especially things like battery life and how long they last. I can personally attest to that.
They more reliably link up to the devices in a way that is not annoying to me. Yep. I think the physical feel in your ear is better than a lot of other brands. And like you said, if you're going to be on Zoom all day or whatever,
it matters.
It's just longer battery life.
Right.
And
They're super well engineered,
Yes.
and that matters with earbuds, wireless earbuds. That matters with you got something that you're plugging into your iPhone or something. Yeah, you know that they're connected to the iPhone because you can see the wire. When you're dealing with something like wireless earbuds and dealing with that, you want to have something that's well engineered and can hang out and can be outside the box for more than an hour at a time.
So you go to buy Raycon, BUY, so buy Raycon, RAYCON.com/Gleeman, and you can get 15% off your Raycon order, and they'll give you free shipping on it.
Correct.
So that's buyraycon.com/Gleeman to get the 15% off and the free shipping. Buyraycon.com/Gleeman. Okay. Let's talk real quick, and then we'll talk Mauer and some other things to wrap up here. But I wrote this the other day or yesterday. So we think they got $5 to $10 million to spend roughly in their self-imposed payroll limit. It's funny that people have realized that I mentioned that at every reference of the payroll self-imposed. I think it's important to mention that.
Sure.
But now people are like, it's annoying that he mentions it like that. Meanwhile, if you don't mention it, it's like you're protecting the poll ads.
I feel like you've been reading Reddit too much.
Well, if you read Reddit at all, you've been reading Reddit too much. So people send me Reddit stuff, which I think is a bad thing to set up. But here's a Reddit thread where they said you're an a-hole. Oh, thanks for sending me that. It's really lovely of you. Okay, so let's go over 12 sort of cornerbacks plus a couple other.
Submitted by Jay Bonus?
Yeah. JL Bonus? Yeah. And he smells too when he comes over in the morning. People are like, how would you know that? Well, I don't want to say it. Okay, here are 12 of the unsigned free agents. Again, 2 weeks before spring training. So if you're unsigned at this point.
Yeah.
Number one, JD Martinez.
Sure.
I just ranked him in terms of like the impact I thought they could make on this current roster. JD Martinez.
He's also a better fit in that he's also a one-year guy.
Right.
Solaire's definitely going to be looking for multiple years.
Yeah, I'm curious what that Solaire ends up being. But yeah, JD Martinez, I would say he's not quite at the level Nelson Cruz was when the Twins signed him. But if you're naming the best DHs of the last 20 years, they're both near the top of the list. He's 36, whereas Cruz was like 38 when the Twins signed him or whatever. Cruz had been closer to kind of an MVP level still in terms of hitting, whereas I think Martinez is more of an all-star level now. He was previously at that level, like when he was 28 to 33 or whatever. He slipped a little bit, and I think last year his strikeout rate jumped, which is maybe a little worrisome at 36 because that might suggest some slowed bat speed and all that. On the other hand, he slugged like almost 600 for the Dodgers. He had 33 homers in fewer than 500 plate appearances for them. He had like a 135 OPS plus, which would have led Twins regulars last season. He is just a right-handed, pure DH. You're not going to play him anywhere in the field. Yeah. If you think of him as kind of a poor man's Nelson Cruz in terms of just hitting ability, I don't think he has the same sort of clubhouse rep and all that stuff. He signed a 1-year, $13 million deal with the Dodgers last year. He had a good year, but also he's 36 now instead of 35. And he had some back problems in the middle of last year, too. He's had some back problems. So my thought is, 1 year, $8 to $12 million should be sort of the range that JD Martinez is looking at here. I mean, his suitors are going to be somewhat limited because he's purely a DH. On the other hand, like you said earlier, post Nelson Cruz, I think the Twins prefer to cycle players through the DH spot. But
I keep hearing they don't want to clog the DH spot, and he clogs the DH
Which I get it, but I remember them talking at the time about Nelson Cruz and how they were willing to make an exception to that because he's just so much better than sort of even a good DH. He's a elite DH.
Yep.
The question to me is whether they see Martinez as close enough to that level that you're willing to make the flexibility sacrifice just to get that bat in the fifth spot in your lineup.
Yeah, for
sure. I mean,
sure.
I think it's debatable. I
agree. Yeah.
I mean, if he were 30, yeah, absolutely. But at 36, I think it's a little bit debatable. Jorge Soler, who you've mentioned a few times, is, I think, like a half step down as a hitter in terms of consistent production.
Sure, he seemed to be hot and cold depending on the year. Right.
So last year, 36 homers for the Marlins.
Right.
In 2019,
second to Shohei Ohtani, basically, in terms of overall home runs, right?
I mean, it's got to be up there.
Yeah.
2019, he led the league with 48 homers for the Royals. But in the 3 years in between, he had a 99 OPS plus, which means he was an average hitter. Right. You can't be an average hitter when you're that bad defensively as Jorge Soler. Soler is a DH in my mind, But unlike Martinez, you can play him in left field or right field. Like if you wanted to make him primarily a DH, but against lefties, he plays left field in place of Wallner or something like that. You could do that twice a week, and you wouldn't love it, but you could handle it. Right-handed bat. I mean, when he's locked in, he hits bombs. I mean, he just launches the ball. Yeah. But strikes out quite a bit. Not a good defender. Not real base runner. But if you just want to add 35 homers from the right side to the middle of your lineup, and you want a little more flexibility than JD Martinez offers, and he's like 4 years younger, he's like his early 30s, that would be a realistic option. Now, he opted out of, he had signed a 3-year deal 2 off seasons ago, opted out of the last year at $13 million.
Right.
Which tells me, like you said, he's either looking for significantly more than $13 million on a 1-year deal, or most likely another 2 or 3 year deal.
MLB Trade Rumors estimate on him at the beginning of the offseason was 3 years, $45 million.
Right. He ain't going to get that.
I don't think he's going to get that either.
So now it's a question of, will he take a 1-year deal or a 1-year deal with an option, something like that.
Vesting option.
So to me, those two, if you're just looking for power from the right side and overall hitting impact that can fit on this roster, JD Martinez and Jorge Soler would be the most efficient way to spend, $10 to $12 million or whatever for this season.
And we just took a quick break. Just before we move on to the next one, we just had some breaking news.
Well, be honest. First, John had to pee.
Yes.
And then while he was peeing, breaking news happened.
Breaking news.
Which is how it's funny. I bursted through the bathroom door to tell him. And it really wasn't a great decision to do that. My shoes are really...
You'd have been scarred.
Physically, emotionally. The breaking news, which we'll talk about it here in a second, was Evan Drellick, who we were talking about his article earlier from The Athletic. Bally, or Diamond Sports Group, which owns Bally, has asked the bankruptcy court to approve 1-year contracts with the Texas Rangers, Cleveland Guardians, and Minnesota Twins for 2024, which means TV only, not streaming rights. Which means for the Twins, which has been the discussion over the last several weeks.
And that the bankruptcy judge will rule on that, we think, on February 9th, Friday,
officially,
a week from today. Yeah.
But our understanding is now, between now and then, the Twins will be back on Bally, which has been trending towards that way, I would say, for about a month now, several weeks now. They'll be back on Bally, Sports North, for this upcoming season only. After that, they'll be free agents again.
Right.
That'll be TV. They own their streaming rights, which means it's effectively the same situation it's been for the last several years, which puts into jeopardy the no blackouts.
Yes. There's been enough pivot. I know that
was
announcement way back at the winter meetings, or it was revealed. Corey Brovas basically said, "I think that the streaming rights are supposed to be available in market this year," and everybody praised it. And now I will tell you, I have sources with the Twins that have told me there is some question about that, because there have been so many twists and turns to this drama over this that it's not totally clear what is going to be going on with streaming rights in market.
What we know is, pretty much, they'll be back on Bally Sports North for another season.
Right.
So those broadcasts will be the same that you've been essentially watching for the last several years. We don't know specifically how much money, although we think, based on what Cleveland and Texas...
It's been reported Cleveland and Texas are getting about 85% of what they were getting.
Their existing deals. So if the Twins got 85% of their existing deal, that would drop it from like $55 million to $45 million, effectively, something like that. Which I think at this stage would be a win for them.
Yeah, for sure. And what impact that might have or might not have on
then
payroll is also
Then the question, and we'll talk a lot about this once we can wrap our hands around this more securely in terms of the details coming out, is, okay, let's say they make $40 million, $45 million. Yeah. Do they invest a significant amount of that back into the payroll for more players at this late stage, or are they still in a spot where they're like, oh, we got $10 million to spend, which we've talked about for this whole episode? Yeah. I think we're equally skeptical. In terms of further investment beyond the sort of $125 to $130 million payroll range.
I am skeptical as well.
I don't think this, but we can talk about that at a time. So basically, this news just broke, and it's Friday. Yes. If we can get more substantial information on this, Now, it's not going to become official until next Friday. But,
we may be doing a Patreon on it. We may be addressing it as part of a mailbag. We might be, but anyway,
we'll treat it as breaking news.
Potentially emergency podcast.
If we can get some actual details that you can hammer home on the broadcast, the streaming situation, the blackout situation, the monetary situation, the sort of plan going forward. Because it's a lot of speculation still at this point. It's a lot of connecting dots, which we can do that. We've done that for 3 months now. But I would prefer to, if we're going to treat it like breaking news.
Let's give it 48 hours and see what happens.
Sort of, yeah.
Okay.
Sign up for the Patreon. You'll get it delivered as soon as we do it.
You're going to love it. Yeah.
Okay, so just to read I'll just read the last 10 names on this list of guys they could pursue. Michael A. Taylor, who we talked about. He's the one
talked about lots
kind of different guy than the rest on this list because he's a center fielder. Now, he is a right-handed bat, and he can hit lefties. My sort of top choices for corner outfield bats would be Adam Duvall and Tommy Pham, who I feel like you and I have talked more about Adam Duvall and Tommy Pham as offseason or trade deadline Twins targets over the last 5 years than we've talked about our own family on this show.
I will tell you, I've had a league source say, the scuttlebutt around various agents is that the Twins were interested in Tommy Pham.
Right.
Now, that's not anybody from within the Twins organization. That's just sort of gossip amongst the agents.
Right. Brandon Belt, who's a first base DH type, he's a really good player at this stage even. And I think largely underrated for his career with the Giants, was good for the Blue Jays last year, but he's left-handed, and he plays first base. So that's a lot of overlap with Alex Kirilloff. I would say sort of the poor man's version of Tommy Pham and Adam Duvall would be Randall Grichuk and Garrett Cooper as a, decent right-handed corner, probably more in the $3 to $5 million range instead of the $5 to $10 million range, something like that. If you want a little bit more defensive flexibility, I would say Enrique Hernandez or Whit Merrifield are not quite super utility guys at this stage of their careers because Whit Merrifield's 35 and Hernandez is 32, but they can play all three outfield spots. They can play second base. They're right-handed bats. Now, they're not good right-handed bats, but they're decent right-handed bats. I think in particular, Hernandez is someone that the Twins have been linked to at times over the years. And then the last two on this were guys we've talked about earlier on the show, which is Donovan Solano, which bring him right back for same type of $2 million deal. Tell him you're platooning with Alex Kirilloff at first base again. It worked just fine last year. That'd be underwhelming, but we know it's a fit because it was a fit last year. And then Carlos Santana, who you've mentioned a few times the last couple shows, who was once a really good middle-of-the-order guy for Cleveland. Now he's 37 years old. He's a switch hitter, first base. Doesn't really hit that well from the left side at this point. But from the right side, could certainly platoon with Alex Kirilloff, similar to how Donovan Solano would platoon with Alex Kirilloff. That's a lot of names. I'm not telling you those are world-beating, throw parade, headline-grabbing signings. Yeah. But I'm telling you, for a team that has a need for right-handed bats,
there's a couple
and has
throw parade.
$5 to $10 million minimally left to spend. Yeah. You should be able to get one or two of those guys on that list, and I think that would supplement the roster in a way that their current guys, even in the minors, but also in the majors, just doesn't in terms of role and handedness and skill set and positional ability and all that. So I would go so far as to say I would be surprised if at least one of those 12 players that I just mentioned is not on the Twins on opening day. I would be surprised by that.
Yep. So I think I would be too.
We'll talk about that if and when that happens. Okay, so just to
I might be surprised if one of those guys is on the Twins roster and by the time pitchers and catchers report.
Well, yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying, probably. Okay, so the last two things we wanted to talk about, one was Joe Mauer, and the other was the Winter Meltdown. We'll talk about Joe Mauer first, I guess. Again, we did a 90-minute show on Joe Mauer, reacting sort of in real time to it. The few things I'll say here is that it's well-deserved. I'm pleasantly surprised. It became clear. My personal feeling is that Joe Mauer was obviously a Hall of Famer from the moment he won his third batting title as a catcher or won an MVP as a catcher. Obviously, the fact that he had a brain injury and he had to move off catcher while he still had a lot of good years left, or at least several good years left at catcher, and then became sort of an average-ish first baseman. My worry was the counting stats are not going to be there, the 3,000 hits and all that stuff. And a lot of voters are going to have a sort of lasting memory of him as just sort of he was an okay first baseman, as opposed to this is a guy who hits 350 at catcher and wins MVP and all that. So I have, and I think you agree, we've viewed Mauer certainly as a Hall of Fame player.
Sure.
But my worry was that
I didn't think he'd make it, truth be told.
you didn't think, did you not think he'd ever make it, or just certainly not on first ballot?
I didn't think he'd ever make it.
Okay.
I think what I said is I don't know.
Okay.
I think is what I said.
I think in the moment, actually, somebody found a clip of this, of us talking about it, and I was like, we were talking like right after the concussion.
Yeah.
Maybe when they announced he was moving to first base that next winter.
Okay.
Where I was like, oh, he's not going to make the Hall of Fame now.
Yeah. Right.
I came to be more optimistic, and then particularly once the early batch of votes came in at the beginning of the offseason, and it was clear he was going to be above 50% minimally. Right. Well, once you debut on a ballot with 50%, you're going to be in the Hall of Fame because you need 75%. There's very few instances ever of a guy debuting even at like 40% and not pushing to 75 within 10 years or whatever. The first ballot part really did surprise me for sure.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is our fear, because like he got 84%, I think, of the ballots made public,
which was something like 54% of the ballots, right, or 55%.
Yes, it was. There's like 400 and something total voters, and the majority of them, but only a slight majority, make them public. Either they write a column about it, or they just tell people what it is, or whatever. And Ryan Thibodeau tracks them, and so it was like 54% of the precincts reporting.
Yeah, right.
He's at 84%. Well, you only need 75%. Right. So we were even a few weeks out or a month out. We said like you can start planning for Cooperstown. It ended up being much closer. And if it would have been like a real sort of election night situation, it would have made for some real stress.
It would have been interesting to have counted, like to announce them on the.
If it was Steve Kornacki or whatever that guy's name.
Yeah. For ballot number 472 out of 476 has.
They cut it a little close. And the reason it was cut so close, I'm looking up the actual numbers here. He had 83.4% of public ballots, which you're an easy Hall of Famer. Right. But our fear at the time, and this is not about Mauer so much as the public-private, the people who are unwilling to make their ballots public are either sort of cranky about it or just so old or not sort of active baseball reporters that they just don't even realize ballots should be made public or are being made public. But in general, the private ballots over the last 10 years or whatever vote for significantly fewer people per ballot, like 2 fewer checks per ballot. Right. And for kind of analytically strong candidates, they tend to vote for them at a much lower rate. And they tend to vote more for like guys you go, well, that guy's not a Homer Vizquel or whatever it is. And so the assumption is, he's at 83% on public, but he's going to be much lower than that on private. And it ended up being significantly lower than even I thought on the private side, which he was 83% public and 66% private, which is absurd. And he ended up getting in by essentially 4 votes out of 400. But here's the thing. They don't put that on the plaque. You know what I mean? The bust is still the bust. He still gets to stand next to Adrian Beltre and Todd Helton and Jim Leland on stage in Cooperstown. He still gets to call himself only the 3rd catcher in the history of baseball to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, along with Johnny Bench and Ivan Rodriguez, who I think would be a lot of people's pick for the 2 greatest catchers, certainly of the modern era. He's the 3rd twin ever to go in on the first ballot, joining Carew and Puckett. Right. And he's only the 4th number 1 pick ever to go in on the 4th ballot, joining Ken Griffey Jr., Chipper Jones, and Harold Baines. So that's pretty good company kind of all around. I'm very happy that I will never get a chance to vote for Joe Mauer because I get a ballot in 5 years or whatever, and I was hoping he wouldn't be on the ballot still by then. I'm pleasantly surprised that he got in. I'm legitimately surprised that he got in on the first ballot. I've thought for a long time, separating Mauer, that catchers are just really underrepresented in the Hall of Fame.
You can say that doesn't necessarily, that actually hurts you, right? Like that hurts his chances of getting in.
Absolutely. So I just mean I'm happy big picture that Mauer's getting in, and also in the next several years, Buster Posey and Yadier Molina, I think, are both also going to get in. So adding 3 catchers when there's only like a dozen total catchers makes an impact, and that goes back to the counting stats thing, which is catchers don't play as many games per season because it's a more physically demanding job, and their careers generally aren't as long. So it's much harder for a catcher to get 400 or 500 homers or 2,500 or 3,000 hits. And so these guys who are just like, well, those are the benchmarks for the Hall of Fame, which are these private ballots, don't view it that way. So I'm glad Mauer got in from that sense. Midsummer, Cooperstown. He becomes the 7th Hall of Famer to go in with a Twins uniform or a Twins hat on, with Oliva, Cott,
Right.
Blyleven, Puckett, Carew, Killebrew, and then obviously you have the Ortiz and Jack Morris and
right.
Winfield
Yeah,
and
right,
Molitor
right,
and those
yeah,
guys who went in with another team. We had a fun hypothetical about who will be the next Major League Baseball Hall of Famer.
I want to reconsider that, actually.
Well,
after
it was on the
based
Patreon.
yeah.
Maybe we'll talk about it on the next Patreon because people chimed in with some. The one we hadn't considered, we talked about Correa, Lewis, Jenkins, Duran, all that. The one we hadn't really considered is veterans ballot,
Right.
Johan.
Yeah.
Which there's not a single person other than someone in Johan Santana's family who would be happier about that than me. But I'm skeptical about that.
Almost immediately after that. Well, let's talk about it on the Patreon. We'll talk about that as part of a mailbag.
See, it's fun to get off these tangents, John. And then, so congratulations to Joe Mauer. It's weird. I'm the same age and same class, high school class as Joe Mauer, and we both were, at the time, St. Paul City Conference. He used to crush us and everything. It's really weird to be like, I knew this. I mean, not that we're friends, but I knew him when we were like 15,
Right.
and I was friends with. I played with some guys who were his. I played with his best man. I think in Little League for years and years.
That's funny.
And it's just so weird to be like, he was famous at 15.
He also started. They drafted him. He became a part of the Twins organization.
At 17.
Basically, the year that we both started writing blogs. Like we
Yeah, right.
started covering the Twins.
It would have been my freshman year of
Right.
college, which
Yeah.
would have been his freshman
Right.
year of college
Yeah,
too.
right.
Also, yeah, but it's surreal to be like. I also saw he's the second or third youngest Hall of Famer that didn't involve like a special election, like for a death or something like that, which makes sense because he retired early because of the injuries, but that didn't hold him back from getting in the
Right.
Hall of Fame because
Yeah,
his peak was so good. So he's going to get in at 41, which is it's hard to get into the Hall of Fame when there's a 5-year waiting period.
yeah,
It's hard to get in at 41. And then the last thing we want to talk about. We were going to talk about Bubba Thompson and all this other stuff. We'll talk about that on the Patreon side. It's just a little thank you to people for the Winter Meltdown. We did this. We won't get that far into it, but hopefully everyone listened to the most recent free episode, which was the clip or the audio from Louie Varland and Matt Wallner joining you and I on stage, which was a lot of fun. We've had a lot of great guests over the decade or so we've done this annual event.
Yeah. Always fun.
We've had Joe Nathan and Perkins and Kadire and LaTroy Hawkins and going back, years and years. But this was the first time we had active Twins players.
Yeah.
And not that was a risk or anything, but it's a little
bit different
vibe. It's not so much, do you remember when, or, tell us about this, or
Right.
now it's like just more of a traditional kind of interview of like last season, this season and everything. And I will say, that
it's also interesting to talk to guys at the beginning of their careers
Right.
as opposed to guys looking
That's
back on their
exactly right.
former career. You know what I mean? To talk to somebody who are very willing to tell you baseball's very hard and we're not sure
Right.
we're going to make it.
yeah, as opposed to back in my day.
Exactly.
Yeah,
right.
it's someone where it's not tell me about the good old days. It's
Right.
tell me how the good days are going to be.
Yeah.
And also, I want to give Louie Varland and Matt Wallner a lot of credit because they are not the loudest or most outspoken guys.
Sure.
They kind of fit the Minnesota stereotype, I would say,
Sure.
of the strong silent type a little bit. And they're good guys. Like I got to know them a little bit this season. They're really
good to talk to.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why we want them as guests. They're both native Minnesotans. They were rookies last year. They helped lead the Twins to the playoffs. But they really both stepped up in a big way. And selfishly or ego-wise, I like to think we provided an environment where they were having fun and it was a very informal, more conversational than interview and all that. But I don't know that that's the case. I think they both just showed a lot of charm and told some good stories and got a lot of laughs. And I heard from so many people, including some of the beat writers who have interviewed them.
Right, yes.
Who were like, man, that was really good. And it was like insulting to us at a point where it's like, you guys did a decent job with that. And it's like, so I just want to give them both credit. They, hope you guys listened, but they had the crowd eating out of their hand.
Yeah.
They had us eating out of their hand. They were telling great stories. They were given good, actual analysis of talking about.
They both stuck around afterwards for pictures and
Yes.
shake hands with people, talk to people a little bit.
Just wanted to give a shout out to Louie Varland and Matt Wallner, and also just the 300 or so people who were there. It was a lot of fun. It's always a great event. Heard from so many people this year, podcast listeners and even like out of town people who said I'm here and I listened to you. I'm in Seattle. I'm in Iowa. I'm in whatever.
Yeah.
It really it was a lot of fun. I met a lot. I put faces to a lot of the freakazoids from Twins Twitter.
That's right. Yeah,
which is always interesting.
Yeah, exactly right.
Some good, some bad. No, I had a couple people come up to me and say, "Can you unblock me on Twitter? I'd like to make a compelling argument for that."
That's funny.
And I told them I'll look into it. I always like when they're like, "I didn't really do anything," and I go, "Really?" And they go, "Okay." Well,
I get worked up sometimes.
yeah, I called you this. It's about to. So yeah, thank you to everybody who came to the Winter Meltdown. I'm excited that the Twins the wheels are at least in motion for some semblance of activity now.
Yes.
I would have liked to space it out throughout the off season a little bit.
I would definitely recommend you consider joining the Patreon. If you are not, we've got listen. I think over the next 2 weeks we will probably have some breaking news.
Yeah.
Maybe a deep dive into the TV situation. Mailbag. Pitchers and catchers report day.
Yes.
I
mean, we're not that far from one or both of us doing the show from Fort Myers.
Yes, right.
While batting practice goes on behind us.
Exactly right.
If you've been waiting to kind of jump back into the Patreon side, the season is ramping up. Yeah. So yeah, it's good. 2 weeks basically. I'll be in Florida in 15 days. You will be in Florida in like 11 days.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's exciting. Although it's not going to be that much hotter. It's weird.
Beautiful blue sky. I think it's going to be 50 degrees today.
Do you know there's going to be one day when we're both in Florida and it's warmer here than it is in Florida?
All my winter activities this weekend are being canceled.
Yeah.
We were going to go to like this ice sculpture thing. That's not happening. There's an ice bar downtown we wanted to check out. I'm not sure that's going to happen.
The beauty of me is it's 68 and sunny inside my house at all times, no matter what the weather. All right. We'll talk to you probably next on the Patreon side. Bye-bye.
Gleeman